Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Casa Navarro's latest webinar. My name is Kristen, and if you don't already know, Casa Navarro is the home site of Jose Antonio Navarro, one of two Tejano signers of the Texas Declaration of Independence. And our webinar today is all about Carpa Garcia and the Mexican circuses of South Texas. And I'm very excited because we have two special guests with us today to share their stories. We have Dr. Monica Brooks and Amelia Garcia Brooks with us today. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to finally meet them. We've been talking for months and I finally get to see what they look like. So it's just as exciting. But if you want to go ahead and get started, Dr. Brooks, sharing your presentation, you should be able to do that right now.
All right. Wonderful. We are very excited to be here today and appreciate everyone's patience with us with technology. And if we have any issues, of course, we'll do our best to resolve those immediately. So I wanted to give you a little bit of highlights of the carpas and a little bit of the history. And then we want to do a Q&A that Kristen has graciously agreed to be our wonderful moderator for. So we appreciate that. But there has to be a disclaimer first, because I am, after all, a librarian, to make sure that our audience is aware that the photos and a lot of the information that you see today have come from family members, gracious support from the Hertzberg Circus Museum, the Whitty Museum, the Institute of Texan Cultures, the Library of Congress, and of course, family members from both the Garcia and Gonzalez families, in addition to encyclopedias and almanacs and other wonderful sources that help us verify our history and preserve it. So I think some of you might already be aware, because you live or are near the neighborhoods where La Carpa performed. But this is typical. These images are typical of what the city was like at the time, understanding, of course, that technology had really not advanced tremendously. And we still had carts and horses and trolleys up and down the streets of San Antonio to kind of give us a perspective of what was popular at the time. My great-grandparents, Manuel and Teresa Garcia, my mom's grandparents, originated La Carpa. They performed in Mexico in a carpa, and later a family in the United States of Montecon gave them the tent and all of the equipment. At this point, we're not completely sure if that was another carpa or if it was a rodeo show or some other type of entertainment. But our family transferred their knowledge of performing in the carpas in Mexico to bring to the United States two different shows, the Metropolitan, which I can't say very well in Spanish, the Argentine show, and then eventually they naming it La Carpas Hermanos Garcia, which is what we know of it today. The whole family came to the United States, of course, legally, and then proceeded to bring the remainder of the family. And as you can see from the nationalization papers, it was a very big family, which, of course, was the impetus for all of the performers and wonderful theatrical acts that were in La Carpa. Las Carpas were very popular form of entertainment at the time, especially during this time period, which included, soon after World War I and the Great Depression and leading into World War II. The Mexican-American families didn't have a lot of money, and many of them did not have transportation. So it was really important that Carpas brought the show to them. And of course, the Navarro Center is very close to a location where La Carpa did perform, and also San Antonio's West Side, which we're aware of some areas there where they came and they set up. These pictures are not all of La Carpa, but they do represent other tent shows in Latin America and Mexico that were popular at the time, to just give you kind of a taste of what it was like for this typical art form. We're fortunate that we have some photographs that have been retained through the years of La Carpa, but there are going to be photographs interspersed of other shows that you're going to see. Unfortunately, as the family traveled from state to state, sometimes the weather and challenges such as tornadoes and floods damaged some of their things. And sadly, we lost a lot of photographs due to that particular challenge through the years. This is just an image of actually a model that you're going to see a picture of later that one of our uncles, great uncles, compiled for the Whitty Museum or the Hertzberg Museum. Raymond Garcia. But it's a perfect depiction and it almost looks real from this perspective for this photograph, which makes it a lot of fun. Everyone in the family participated in some aspect of supporting La Carpa, including my grandmother, who didn't necessarily perform, but helped great-grandmother Teresa with the food tent, for example, the place where they had to feed everybody. Imagining there were a lot of workers and people that had to contribute to putting on this show, and we had to keep them fed. So that was another very important job. And also feeding the local community sometimes who may have not had a meal. That was another wonderful way that the Carpa gave back to the community in addition to entertaining. This photograph is just absolutely charming because it's actually part of a 1970s slideshow for history that was distributed to K through 12 schools all across America. And lo and behold, there was a picture of the Garcia brothers show in this interesting set. But what's cool about it is it depicts what the entrance might have looked like, and also how they would have dressed in costume to hopefully lure people that were walking by to come buy a ticket to come to the show. My grandfather, mom's dad, Manolo Garcia, was a front man, and he would go into the town where they were going to perform to obtain the various permits and always make sure that the local government and even the K through 12 schools were able to come to the first show for free. So talk about marketing strategies. That was pretty slick and very, very shrewd. As I've mentioned, everyone in the family participated, and the tent that they received from the Montecon family had to be preserved as well, because that was their bread and butter. As you can see, family members from the Garcia family had to repair the tent or, make sure that it was in perfect working order. Also, as they traveled from city to city, they lived in these little trailers and also used them to advertise the show as it blew through town. And just imagine what that was like to see the Carpa caravan going from city to city on the road. That must have been very exciting for the people at the time, anticipating all of the potential entertainment and enjoyment that they would have. When they went from city to city, it was important too that they had workers on each of those sites, because the whole family participated in some aspect of La Carpa, but they needed helpers to erect the tent and to get everything up and running. Mozos were hired everywhere they went, and mom can correct me, but they usually erected the tent at night, right, mom?
Oh,
so that it was
they had to clear the pasture. Sometimes it was 6 or 7 feet tall, more or less, and they had to clear it as well.
So that's another element of the entertainment magic that the family would contribute to go into a place that was not occupied, clear the field, and then poof, by the next morning, there was a giant tent and all kinds of trailers and excitement ready for that day's entertainment. Family members were acrobats and trapeze artists and singers and dancers. One of the families that was a participant in La Carpa came from Corpus Christi, Hermanitas Góngora, right?
Correct.
And they even cut a few records that we understand might still be floating around in San Antonio, but these girls were very talented guitarists and singers, and are just an example of one of the acts that performed with La Carpa.
Lydia Mendoza, very famous.
Lydia Mendoza is also affiliated with La Carpa, and I think many of you are probably aware that she was, very popular in San Antonio.
Rosita Fernandez.
Rosita Fernandez.
She was with my dad later.
And performed with Manolo Garcia and his orchestras. You'll find, as we discuss the various talents, that a lot of our family members stayed in show business and performed in and around San Antonio for many, many years after La Carpa. We are very fortunate that a professor, when he was studying in graduate school, Peter Clare Haney, did his dissertation on La Carpa and unearthed many of the wonderful stories and songs and little sketches, in addition to information that pertained to the layout of the tent. He did several oral histories and interviews with family members in the early 2000s, and we're fortunate to have that documentation. This is a representation of what the tent looked like inside the ring. And imagine, they did everything in the night by torches or lanterns, and it really had a sophisticated setup. He was also able to piece together a sample of what the posters look like that they would have distributed through town to entice people to come to the show. And another method for getting people interested in coming to the show was piling into the truck, loudspeaker, music, maybe have a combo on the back of the truck to go around town. Is what was it called, Mom? The compasito?
Convito. Convite.
And that
Invitation.
also garnered some excitement because the children would run after the truck and sing, and they would want to, of course, go to the show and convince their parents to take them. This is a sample of what it would have probably looked like that, erecting the tent in the night with the mozos. Some of these pictures are from also Carpa Cubana, which was popular at the time as well. There were 3 that traveled through Southwest Texas, Monsiváis, Cubana, and Garcia. And of course, they all knew each other, and sometimes they performed in each other's shows. They coordinated schedules, they didn't overlap. Usually, and then of course had opportunities for people to have that entertainment on a regular rotating basis. But we're fortunate that the Institute of Texan Cultures also has some wonderful information about Carpa Cubana. Performers, as I said, went in between the circuses, and of course people fell in love, got married, families intermarried, so that the blood of the performer was strong, and the various generations continued. And this is just an example of one of our relatives, our cousin Howard's dad, Don Robinson, who married Aunt Esther Garcia, and they performed in the Cole Brothers show. And these are some pictures that our cousin Howard had of his dad when he performed in Cole Brothers. Of course, the Carpas always tried to be contemporary, in addition to having folk and traditional acts. And somebody would dress up as Charlie Chaplin, or they would mimic some of the stars' acts and music of the time and dances to keep it fresh. I mentioned that our uncle created a replica of the tent, and this is part of the Whitty Museum's collection, and so much fun to see in real life, because it really gives you a handle on the sophistication of and the engineering of putting something like this together, and noticing, of course, that even the bleachers are perfectly erected so that they could be stored flat and of course, taken from town to town. This is our uncle, who would be Manuel III, right, Mom? Garcia. And he was my mom's older brother, and he got to perform in La Carpa because he was very, very talented. He could sing and dance and also play the trumpet as a child. One of the stories that we're aware of is our aunts Consuelo and Esther would be dressed in military attire and do a tap dance routine with Uncle Manuel, and he had a cloak that they had made where one side was the Mexican flag and the other side was the American flag, and the big finale was when he would flash the flags at the end of the show, which, Mom, didn't they say it brought the house down?
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Because of course, Mexican Americans, many Mexican people born in the United States, several generations born in the United States, are just as committed to American culture as they are Mexican culture. So the acts were like vaudeville, which must have been a riot. And of course, the acts appealed to the population at hand. They had to keep it fresh with political satire. They always knew what the latest fashions were, what the latest dances were, and interspersed were, musical acts, mentalists, ventriloquists, trained animals, to do tricks and whatnot, which really must have been spectacular for the time. The eldest daughter in La Carpa, her name was Aida, and she was very, very pretty and also very smart. And she and her sister had several dancing acts. And as you can see, these are contemporary costumes, probably from the early 20s or maybe even the late teens. Children got into the act too, so the costumes were quite elaborate and the children would perform. This is Alfredo Castro, who was married to Aida later, and also other children, Delia and Gilberta. I think Gilberta is the mom of Delia. They did all kinds of really fun sketches and made sure that everything that they did appealed to the audiences. Many times they even had to improvise to keep it fresh. And just imagine the creative talent that requires to improvise. As I know, it's very difficult for me when I'm standing in front of a class. It doesn't always work out that great. One of our aunts who also was a performer in La Carpa, I don't have a picture of her name was Alda Gonzalez. She did like a Shirley Temple act, and she was a draw, and the circus goers looked forward to seeing the child acts because they were so unique. The other carpas also had some cool acts that people wanted to come back and see over and over again. And these are some pictures from Carpa Cubana. And one of theirs was the flying frog, La Rana, who somebody in a frog costume who did all kinds of trapeze and tightrope acts that really packed them in. And obviously they also too made sure that they had contemporary and traditional dress and clowns and musical guests and all kinds of fun things that would bring them back. La Carpa was known for having beautiful girls, dancing girls. And here you can see that these aren't Mexican traditional dresses. These are more like flappers from the 1920s. Again, they kept the music and the dancing, everything contemporary, whatever was popular at the time, and it interspersed with traditional folk dancing and other things that were popular. This is probably my favorite picture of La Carpa. This is my grandfather, Mom's dad, Manolo, and his older sister, Aida. He was, as we mentioned earlier, the front man who would go into town because he spoke perfect English and would work with the mayor's office or the city council or whoever he had to work with to get whatever permits he needed. And also in the beginning of his time with La Carpa, he was a clown. He later became the primary band leader and also wrote the orchestrations for the band. And was the main musical performer and sometimes even ringmaster. So it's wonderful to see him as a teenager, right, Mom?
17.
17 with his older sister. She would have been, what, about 19?
Perhaps, yes.
Yeah, 18, 19 years
Yeah,
old.
yeah, I think so.
The costumes so intricate. Imagine they were sewing these while traveling, living in their tents or living in their trailers. And the beading on this gown is absolutely gorgeous. And I wish that we had it because I would love to see it in person. But she's dressed as I don't know, some kind of Indian little sketch. And that is a beautiful depiction of a Indian chief kneeling on her dress.
Satire.
Yes, satire. Pilar Garcia, who is not of the Garcias, married into, and of course, Garcia is like Smith. So we have lots of Garcia family members that are not blood. Pilar married Consuelo, and he was known for the high wire. He did an act where he pretended to be drunk and would stumble all over the wire, scaring the audience with never falling, which was really cool. I'm sure that was quite a scene. And of course, we had members of the family who were very talented acrobats. This is Esther Garcia, who went on to perform with Ringling Brothers. And as I mentioned, many of the family members continued in the entertainment industry after La Carpa. And of course, many of them also stayed in San Antonio. One fun story is while they had animal acts in La Carpa, even after La Carpa, grandmother Monica, who is my namesake, Mom's grandmother, would ride a horse bareback and even stand on it. And we think she performed in a rodeo after La Carpa. When the Hertzberg had a wonderful circus display many, many years ago, they acquired these costumes from the various carpas. These are not necessarily from La Carpa Garcia, but they are from some of the others, and show you how intricate and how beautiful the beading and the designs were on all of the costumes that they use for their clowns and dancing girls and different characters. It's really, really spectacular. There were also individuals that were contracted to work with La Carpa who were not necessarily family members. You didn't have to be a member of the family to perform. And this gentleman, I believe he went by the name Fong and was, yep, and was a magic act. And then this trapeze artist is actually from Carpa Cubana. And as I've mentioned, sometimes they would perform at each other's shows through the years. And Rudolph Valentino was popular, so of course they had to do an act or a sketch that highlighted whatever was happening at the time and who was popular. And with all the current styles being in vogue, it's kind of fun to see this picture, probably from the late 30s or early 40s, of Consuelo and Pilar dressed as characters.
Rafael.
Oh, that's Raphael.
Rafael. He was hired.
And he was not a member of the family. So again, another good example of how they had several individuals with such amazing talent who participated.
Consuelo made the costumes.
And our Aunt Consuelo made those costumes. And these are, of course, traditional Mexican costumes, the charro and the dancing girls for the Mexican hat dance. And one of my favorite stories is my grandmother, Florinda, Mom's mother, who, as I mentioned earlier, normally worked in the chow wagon or feeding the masses with our great-grandmother, Teresa.
Or translating.
Or she did translation. She also sometimes would dance the part of the male in the Mexican hat dance because she could fit in the costume. She was tall and thin, and she could pull the hat way down and nobody could tell that she was actually female when sometimes the men were not available to perform. So I love that story. The other story she told us when we were growing up is our grandmother sometimes had to fill in for the magic act for levitation, and there was a metal bar that she had to, stealthily put her armpit on, and then the magician would lift her, and then she would have to continue to extend on this metal bar. She said it was incredibly painful, but she had to fake it the whole time and pretend that she was in a trance. So I would give anything for our time machine to go back and see that. Another draw to La Carpa was a character named Don Fito that our uncle Rodolfo Garcia perfected. He performed this character and really engaged the audience and, playing the little tramp and mugging around and cracking jokes. And of course, as we mentioned, there was a lot of political satire at the time. Imagine just like Saturday Night Live, whatever's happening in the country at the time or in the vicinity of the carpas and the neighborhoods and whatnot. That's what they would joke about and make fun of. So it required a lot of improvisation and also rewriting sketches on a regular basis. So taking the show on the road takes an awful lot of work and creativity. After La Carpa, as we mentioned, a lot of family members stayed in San Antonio, performing at the National Theater. Mom's dad, Manolo, had several bands, and we're super proud that his legacy continues with his son, Albert, with the Groove Doctors. And if you go to La Jarra in San Antonio, you'll probably see him performing, or El Jarro.
De Arturo.
Yes. So very, very cool that we've got family members carrying on the tradition of Manolo's orchestras and bands that performed all over San Antonio. And then other family members did other stuff. Like I'm so proud that my parents participated in the mariachi choir at Mission San Jose, which is right there in San Antonio, a UNESCO World Heritage location. If you get a chance to go to the mariachi choir on a Sunday, please do, because it's an absolutely fantastic experience. This is a choir that was started by Alfredo, his wife, Aurora,
her parents.
and it's been in existence for more than 50
50,
years.
uh-huh.
So, and also we have talented artists on the river in San Antonio. You can see Adriana Garcia's handiwork, and also on several buildings in San Antonio. She's a very talented muralist. And then we've got some cousins who have made it in Hollywood, which is fantastic and very hard, a tough life as comedians and actors and casting agents and you name it. And then there's just a picture of Albert and the Groove Doctors performing at Dick's Last Resort on the Riverwalk. If you go to Fiesta, you'll probably see the Groove Doctors because they're a regular fixture on the Riverwalk for that wonderful event. And as we wrap it up and get ready for Q&A, I just wanted to say that, you know, in my capacity as a librarian, you would think that a librarian would take the show on the road very often, but she actually kind of does. And me and my cousins, my contemporaries, often say that we can tell that there's a legacy of La Carpa because the concept of the show must go on and honoring our ancestors is always with us. So take it away, Kristen.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Brooks. And I just want to let everyone know, if you have any questions, you can type that into the question feature and we can get to those at the end of the webinar. But right now I have a few questions for Mrs. Brooks. And I want to start out with, in doing my research, I also read one of Dr. Haney's dissertations, and in it he writes, Manolo was an acrobat, clown, comic actor, pianist, and wrestler. He appeared to be the star of the show during the late 20s and 30s. So, Mrs. Brooks, do you know what talent he enjoyed the most?
His music, his piano. He started playing piano, picking at the piano at the age of 5. And grandmother and grandfather recognized this, but of course he could not read at the time. But he was what they call in Espanol, oído lírico, that he played by ear, you know, and he did. And as soon as he started reading, he didn't need it, but they've hired a maestro to teach him, and he did very well. And that was his first love, and he continued way into older age.
Wow, that is to have so much talent in one family really is cool. I mean, you don't see that very often, that's for sure.
I'm amazed myself.
Mom is a talented artist. She does wonderful jewelry. I'm
Really?
wearing some, of course.
Oh, wow. So it just continues on after generation, right? Did you, Mrs. Garcia Brooks, did you get to see your father perform, if not in the Carpa, if in his band later on?
Oh, yes. I have a little story to tell you. Like Monica was telling you, the contemporary, they always kept up with the latest music, the latest everything about the world around them. And there was Duke Ellington that had a swing song that was Be-Ba-Ba-Reba, Be-Ba-Ba-Reba. Okay, and it's a beautiful swing song. And I remember my mom having me by the hand and my sister in her arms. And that song made the audience also participate. So that was Be-Ba-Ba-Reba, Be-Ba-Ba-Reba, and the audience would also say Be-Ba-Ba-Reba, and they clap their hands, you know. And here's my little sister, and she could hardly talk, I guess about 1.5 years. Eva, Eva, she participated. And of course, my mom had to hold me because I wanted to dance. So that was a lot of enjoyment for me. I was only 4 years old, but in later life, Dad was playing all over the city and weddings, and he even played in a coronation or two. He played with the policeman's band of San Antonio. You saw one of the pictures. It was amazing. And my brother Manuel played the trumpet with him and sang later when he was in high school. But I loved it. It was very nice. And they played the mambo, the cha-cha, Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom, all contemporary of the time. So
That's
it
so
was great.
cool. Yeah. You must have been very young when the Carpa Garcia ended. But do you know how the rest of the family took that?
They were prepared. Grandmother was ill. They had initially based in Corpus Christi in preparation for this. Grandmother had property in San Antonio, so they did decide to go back because that they had physicians there. The family physician was there, and so they were resigned to it. I think that they saw another world ahead of them. Change is good. Change is good for people. I left San Antonio for England when my husband was in the military. Then we came to West Virginia. Monica was 2, and here we are back in West Virginia after 50 years. So change is good, and I think they saw another future. I'm sure they miss the grind of applauded, like when the people applaud and all that, but they continued, and some of them gave dance lessons and just went into the Zaragoza and Nacional Theater with the Follies. I think that's what they called them at that time, chorus girls, and then they danced individually. And Dad, of course, kept up with the piano. He played piano at Zaragoza Nacional for the movies, the silent movies. So they went through everything that they could do.
Wow. Yes, I read that many actors from the plays would also go into the carpas and vice versa. It
Yes.
really seemed like everyone utilized their talents as best they could
Yes,
to not only, of course, it was a passion, I'm sure, but also to provide for their families.
exactly.
Have you been in contact with any of the other, maybe like Carpa Cubana or any of the other groups?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I met a lady some time ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, that was the daughter of the owner, and she was tiny, and she showed me pictures when she performed, just coming on stage and things like that. But they also, I don't know exactly, I know they went into different jobs in San Antonio, etc. And one time she said that one of her uncles or one of the relatives had been a composer, and that some of his music was going to be published. But then we broke, we left, and I haven't been in touch. But,
And that was Monsivais?
Monsivais.
Monsivais.
La Carpa Monsivais, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were there any stories passed down to you from, would that be your grandfather, your grandfather, the creator of the Carpa Garcia?
There were lots of stories all the time, and one that fascinated me was that one time they were in a small town somewhere in the valley, and there were rumors that at 3 o'clock in the morning, La Llorona would pass by, and this Llorona had everybody scared. Okay, well, grandfather was about 5'2", but Mr. Muscles and active. Of course, he was a strong man. So he said, I am going to see about La Llorona because I don't believe in La Llorona. And he sat outside in front of La Carpa with his rifle. And I don't think it was loaded. And he, clack, 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 at 3 o'clock in the morning, here comes La Llorona. And La Llorona was coming down, and clack, clack, and he says, alto. And I remember that. I thought that was cool. And clack, 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 alto. And clack, clack, clack. And finally he said, alto, or I'll shoot. And she stopped. Ay, por favor, señor, please don't shoot me. I just am going out somewhere, she says. And I don't want anyone to know. And people here think of La Llorona. So so it was interesting, to mind you, in those days. And of course, that was a big laugh. And he always told that story.
Oh my God. Well, yes, my parents and my grandparents, they definitely scared us with La Llorona to make sure we stayed in bed every night, not wander around.
Exactly. But the stories that he told, they were, like I said, very aware of political situations. And of course, I was beyond that. I was just a child. But I wish I had a recorder, or I wish I had really listened or understood. But mostly were political things from their country and different things that adults would speak of at the time. And they were very all informative about everything, informed.
Yes, it's really surprising, in a very positive way that anybody can be involved. Yeah, and everybody's going to have an opinion about these kinds of things. It's not just for one segment of the community, right? It affects
Exactly.
everyone. And everyone's going to have their own opinion. But Dr. Brooks, you mentioned earlier the food tents. And would you share any more about the good that they did in the community when they would go into towns?
Mom's got the scoop on that.
They had a situation in those days that was very popular where people would barter. They would come with 3-4 chickens and the whole little family to pay their way into the shows. And it was understood that, yes, you are welcomed. There were a lot of braceros, so to speak, and they work hard. Their wages were very low, and they felt that this is what they wanted to do or could afford. They would bring vegetables and all that. But there were many times when there were people that were hungry. They would come, and my grandmother would open the door. They also gave the matinee, the first matinee, like Monica told you, to the schools. And all the dignitaries were invited. And that was like very good public relations. And also to show to the dignitaries that it was a clean family performance each time, which I think that was very important for the times. And they were highly respected, and people waited for them every season. And my grandmother always said that it was good to give because you get something in return, and not necessarily monetary returns, but blessings. So,
well, I think that is, if that's evident anywhere, it's in the talent that you all still have and still provide to everyone else, God, I don't even know where I'm at in my questions. I already forgot.
I did want to mention one thing, Kristen, along the lines of your questioning. In addition to, helping the community and bartering and letting people bring, a chicken and helping to feed the masses and also going to the show, I'm so proud that the Garcia and Gonzalez and extended family, they not only survived the Depression and post-World War II, but they were able to buy the land and erect their little houses in the West End of San Antonio and have a wonderful retirement option for everyone in the family who lived there for many, many years. And I understand some of those houses are gone now, but some of them are still there. And there are Garcia descendants and Gonzalez descendants still living in those wonderful little houses that they erected after the show was closed.
Wow. That is so cool. Oh, I forgot to mention to all of our viewers, we currently have, the whole reason we're doing this webinar is because we currently have a temporary exhibit here at Casa Navarro about the Mexican carpas that were here on the San Antonio's west side. And in doing that research, we got connected with Dr. Brooks and Mrs. Brooks. And so we're so happy to have you here today. Are there any other stories you would like to share or anything like that with our audience?
Like Monica told you that they went through very bad weather, etc. Well, I remember my first remembrance of going into a field late at night, arriving, and all the chatter and activity going on. I guess, fast asleep. I remember the crickets. There were millions of crickets you could hear. when they landed at night, and they hired the mozos. It was good for the community also. And it was that first realization that I need of myself, I think, so to speak, and of belonging to someone. But they adapted to every situation. And I have to interact. Oops, what happened?
We're good.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
They had generators. They had two generators, so they had this electricity right away. And that was to me amazing. But the fact that now, as I reflect, they really, really were well organized. Scripts, they wrote them, everything. The ladies even made their own eyelashes of their own, out of their own hair. Can you?
What?
Yeah. And the times, they were ahead of the times in many ways. They made their own eyelashes with their hair. How? I wish I could
Wow.
know how. Because you stop and think about that.
Oh
Okay.
my God. Well,
And-
all of the challenges. I mean, it really speaks to the Carpa Garcia, as it was one of the most well-known and longest running, surviving
Yeah.
the Depression, when
Yes.
what other job survived? Really, everyone was out of work, and to keep
Yes.
not just, not just a business running, but to keep a whole family employed.
Yeah,
And to go
exactly.
to those rural communities where many people did not have the money, like you said earlier, or were not even given the opportunity to have that kind of entertainment, and to see that it was other Latino people putting that on and running that show. I mean,
And Kristen, they had a chance to perhaps go to Hollywood. An agent for Roy Rogers. You're too young to know about Roy Rogers, but this was a troupe that was on television, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. An agent came to my grandfather and wanted for them to go to Hollywood. I don't know whether it was permanently or to sign up to appear in some of their shows or movies. And my grandfather, he said, no, we're not going to, we are a unit. We have been, together for all these years. And we're a good family, and I don't want it to break up. And he refused it. So that was a story that I heard as a child.
oh my
I said to my
goodness.
mother, wow, y'all should have gone.
Hollywood. Come on.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, that, I mean, when you value your family that much, you want to keep them together no matter what
Mhm. Yeah.
the opportunity there are. It's most important that the family stick
And the
together.
family's mentality was the same, he ruled and grandmother ruled, and they knew that they were secure and happy, and they liked what they did. So there were no regrets from them.
We do have a few questions that have come in. Do you know the farthest that the Carpa traveled to perform? How far away did they go for their performances?
I think it was New Mexico. New Mexico. Arizona. My dad was born in San Juan, Arizona. And as far as I know, California, and of course, Texas, and I expect a few other states above them. But that was about it. They stayed, they didn't go very far.
Well, California is pretty, but that's hundreds
Yeah,
and
really.
hundreds of miles to
Yeah,
lug all that
yeah.
equipment and all those people,
Yeah. That's right, that is. So,
And
go ahead.
I read that, for pretty far distances like that, because they had so much equipment, they would even travel by train.
Well, no, they never did.
No? Okay.
Not sure what year time frame that was, but I do know that when they started out, they were in the wagons.
Oh, yeah. Their own
Uh-huh.
trucks and wagons.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe some of the other carpas did travel by train.
We have one more question. Would you be willing to share the addresses of some of those Garcia family homes that may be still standing?
Is that El Paso Street?
My house was just demolished.
Oh,
I think a couple of months ago, mind you. And it was right next to San Juan de los Lagos Church on El Paso Street.
Oh,
A
wow.
lot of houses that are fairly close to
My
each other.
grandmother's house was on Southwest West 19th Street, but I can't give you the address. It is someone else owns it.
Mhm.
And it's right across from the Boys Town facility on Southwest 19th Street. If that one is still there. It's not in very good condition, but that's all things go. Let's see, everybody has moved out. Consuelo's house was demolished as well. She was also next door to San Juan de los Lagos. Rodolfo's house, I don't think is standing, maybe it is. But he eventually sold he sold it, and he had another house on El Paso Street. So
So if you could soak it in if you just walk down El Paso Street. or
Yeah,
into
definitely.
the church, yes.
We have one more comment, and this is from our site manager, Georgia. I saw the exhibit in the Witty years ago and became so enamored of your story. Thank you all for sharing this with us.
Oh, that's
well,
nice.
thank you very much for having us.
Yes, of course. And we have one more question. Did Carpa Garcia ever travel to Mexico to perform, or did they just stay in the United States?
No, they just stayed in the United States. But my dad, when he was wrestling, a very young man, did wrestle in Mexico, and my grandfather was his manager. And in Mexico, they wanted to contract him. This is another story, to tour Europe, and he refused. He didn't. I don't think I was born yet, but he, as usual, wanted to stay with the family. You know, they realized they had a very good thing going on. They were secure. They had everything they needed, and they stuck to that, which I'm glad. You know, it showed a lot of, what would you say?
Well, cohesiveness, they didn't want to break up the
Exactly.
band, or break up the acts, or break up the family show.
And they were so superstitious, family show people are superstitious, that they felt that it would be bad luck too.
In fact, there's a story that we think is apocryphal. It's oral history handed down, that there was another daughter of Manuel and Teresa named Esperanza, who may or may not have existed. We're still trying to track down, any records to that effect. But it's rumored that as a child, she was performing on the high wire and fell and died.
It was a stick, and they called it percha.
Oh, the perch.
Percha. And she would climb up and balance, and supposedly she fell. But it's a beautiful storyline, and it could have happened, and her birth was not registered because at the time.
But the family did not say her name
Mhm.
for fear of the superstition of bad luck when performing. And so that has added to the mystery of whether Esperanza existed or not, because the family did not speak of her for many, many years out of grief and also superstition. So if we track her down, we will update our websites and other Wikipedia and other things to ensure that her legacy is preserved.
Wow, that's incredible. Some stories are just so hard for people that they get lost,
Yes.
trying to protect themselves from that grief, but you
Yeah.
can't blame them at all for doing so.
Absolutely.
But back to your father, did he have a stage name when he was wrestling?
Oh my gosh, now that I think I knew it at one time, or maybe it was just Manolo. I'll have to, you gave me something to think about. I have not even thought about that.
We need to ask a librarian, Mom.
Yeah, the library.
Here's what we always say. I don't know the answer to this question. We need to ask a librarian.
If only you knew
Google.
someone who knew how to research these things.
Right.
There
Yes.
she is.
We have one more comment and question. This is from Clint. Thank you so much for sharing your family story. My grandfather said he traveled with boxing matches during the Depression in Texas. They
Oh.
traveled similar to the carnivals. do you know anything about these other traveling performers here in Texas?
That's cool.
Wow, this is the first time I've heard about that. That
My grandpa, he says he remembers whenever, performers would come to town, and boxers would come as well, and they would bring this would never happen today, of course. You could pay to fight a baby bear.
Oh, dear.
And so my grandpa would tell me about, this is what reminds me of these boxing matches. He remembers you paying like a nickel or something, and the bear had boxing gloves, and you would box the bear. But do you know of any other types of these performers or these traveling performances?
I don't doubt it for a minute.
Oh, I've
because,
seen
yeah,
it in old movies and
Uh-huh.
a lot of times, and a big tough wrestler or boxer would fight anybody in the audience, and the money was going back and forth, New York City, everywhere. But I don't recall any of that. That is interesting.
That's great. I hope the family member does pursue that, because that's another piece of Texas history that's going to be real important to preserve. That's fantastic. I know in West Virginia, I've seen posters, antique posters of somebody boxing a baby bear or whatever. So I don't doubt it for a minute that they have that in Texas too.
Were there, did the Carpa Garcia have any trained like animals or anything like that?
They didn't. They would hire people. I do remember they had a man perform with little dogs. They had something for the children also, and that was one of them. They had all the clowns. I know one of my uncle had a pet monkey, but they got rid of him because he bit him on the lip, and so that was it. But they didn't carry no elephants that I remember. No, I think the upkeep might have been too much.
Yeah, always having to travel and do everything yourself. I
Yes,
get that. That's a huge
yes.
undertaking.
Mhm.
Definitely.
But it was a way of life in the days of no federal assistance, and I tell you, they would never go for that themselves. But they had it more than enough for everyone, and just to, I'm repeating myself, but even
okay.
people that need it. So
They took care of themselves.
but another thing that they emphasized on us, this is one thing. My mom and the aunts that had little children, school children, they would enroll them in every town they would go if they were going to be there more than 2 weeks. They were always in school. And I remember my brothers with stacks of report cards from some of these schools and notes from the schools that they really enjoyed them and they loved for them to come back. And so that was very important for them, for the kids to get their education.
And our cousins were just here from California, and Paul Garcia is Manuel the third's son, who performed as a child. Remember, he's the one who wore the cloak with the American flag and the Mexican flag. And he says he just found his dad's application for military security clearance from probably what, Mom, the 60s, early 60s?
Yes, he was an agent for the Labor Department.
Okay. And part of this included your elementary school documentation. And of course, our Uncle Manuel had to say, various and many, because there were so many schools that he attended traveling with La Carpa as a little boy during that time period. So Paul relayed to us that was very interesting to find after all these years.
Oh, definitely. I think with any traveling, when any family travels, it seems like the education is what suffered the most, because they were always moving, having to do with the seasons and things like that. So that really speaks to the importance of education within the family and for the business, I'm sure.
We're also aware that our Aida, the eldest daughter, made sure that if the kids were not in school for any period of time, that she actually homeschooled them. Because she was very bright, and she would make sure that they knew their letters and mathematics and the basics for when they went back to school, they were perfectly caught up.
Yeah, she did that for my brother-in-law because her own daughter was very tiny. Well, no, she was right in there. That's right. Yeah. And the daughter became a registered nurse. How about that?
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's we're almost to 1 o'clock right now. We don't have any more questions coming in. So I want to thank you both again for sharing your time with us, and everyone who's listening for spending your lunch hour with us as well. I know in West Virginia it's a little earlier than that over there, but thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
And thank you very much.
Oh, thank
This has
you.
been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.